Erica Liljegren was a lonely waitress suffering from a history of abuse.
She didn't know if somebody was going to try and hurt her.
She finally found a man she could trust in former Army medic Liljegren-Martinez.
And she had finally found the savior that she was looking for. Once she saw Ryan as that hero, sparks started to fly.
When the lovers fell on hard times, they turned to Ryan's mother and stepfather, two beloved nurses, for help.
This created the perfect opportunity for Ryan and Erica to get back on their feet.
But things took a dark turn when Ryan's parents mysteriously disappeared, and police were left wondering if the two nurses' pasts had caught up with them.
They were mixed up in this seedy gambling world.
Were they running from a dangerous bookie? What were they running from?
Now, hear from those closest to the story how a series of terrifying events left a community in shock.
It's like I was in a bad nightmare, but it was real life.
And learn how resentment, betrayal, and undying love all collided in an appalling crime.
I just didn't expect it to end like this. Never, in my wildest dreams, would I have thought that would happen.
Chesapeake, Virginia, July 25th, 2013. A patrol officer had just arrived at an upscale suburban home to check on the middle-aged couple who lived there. According to friends and co-workers, the couple had been missing for several days.
It was very unlike them to not show up at work, not call, not show, not do anything, and all of a sudden, they're not there. Everybody else was starting to wonder what's going on, where are they, what happened?
The officer tried the front door, but it seemed as if no one was home. Wondering if the couple had simply gone on a trip without telling anyone, the officer reported no sign of a disturbance and left the property.
He radios back that, hey, everything seems okay here.
But what the officer couldn't have known at the time was that the house wasn't as empty as it seemed. And when investigators finally found what was hidden inside, it would unravel a grotesque tale of obsession, betrayal, and a secret two lovers would do anything to protect. Hemet, California is a peaceful town located south of the San Bernardino Mountains. But for Erica Liljegren, growing up there was anything but peaceful. Starting when she was only a child, Erica was sexually abused by two of the people closest to her.
She had a very troubled childhood because of her grandfather multiple times molesting her while she was growing up. And even one time her own brother also molested her.
She didn't feel comfortable even sleeping at night because she didn't know who was going to, come into her room.
Erica endured the unthinkable betrayal in silence until she graduated high school and was old enough to stand up for herself.
I can only imagine mentally what that would do to a young girl growing up.
Eager to move out on her own, Erica left as soon as she turned 18, and she got as far away from her childhood home as she could. She dreamed of a normal life and meeting someone she could love and trust.
She's looking for somebody to rescue her. She's looking for stability.
But instead of finding love, Erica spent her 20s stumbling through a string of bad relationships.
Because of the early childhood abuse, her definition of love or how a man should treat her was very clouded.
She had a penchant for picking men that were abusive both verbally and physically towards her.
Erica fell into a deep depression, struggling to deal with her painful past.
When she would find a job, she could not get any stability because she was using drugs, alcohol, and she would eventually get fired from one job and move on to the next.
By the time she was 26, Erica was working as a waitress at a roadside diner in Florida, scraping out a living on tips from customers. Erica was lonely, but she was trying to stay off drugs and turn her life around for the better. And she would find the second chance she was looking for when the diner hired a new employee, a 22-year-old dishwasher named Ryan Martinez. Unlike Erica, Ryan's childhood had been pretty comfortable. Raised by his mother, Cindy, he was pampered and coddled most of his childhood.
She treated him as a mama's boy, basically, and he was pretty much allowed to do whatever he wanted.
She was a single mom. She was struggling. And so she tried to provide everything she could.
Cindy, who was called CJ by her friends, worked hard to keep her son's life as normal as possible. And when Ryan was still just a young boy, she fell in love with and married a man who made their lives much easier.
He was a millionaire, and in her mind, she was able to give her son, Ryan, the life that she dreamed of. So she really thought she had hit the jackpot.
Ryan's stepfather was far stricter than Ryan's mother, and he quickly put an end to Ryan's spoiling.
He's a very disciplined man, businessman. He's focused, and he wants to incorporate that same discipline within his household.
Ryan found himself having to follow all these strict rules, and it kind of pushed him away.
Ryan felt even more pushed to the side when his mother gave birth to a second son named Christopher.
Ryan felt like the black sheep of the family. He was the stepchild. And I think Ryan kind of resented Chris because somebody else taken him away from his mom. I think Ryan develops anger issues from that. I think Ryan resented his brother, his stepfather, and even his mom because his mom is allowing this to happen.
As he grew into a teenager, Ryan began acting out and challenging his stepfather's authority. But to his dismay, Ryan's mother took sides with her husband, telling her son it was time for him to shape up or ship out.
They told him he either needed to get a job, go to college, or join the military.
Eager to get away from his family, Ryan did exactly that. Ryan enlisted in the Army, where he served for several years as a combat medic. But his time in the military didn't turn out to be quite the adventure he'd been looking for. When he returned to civilian life, the terrible things Ryan had seen on the battlefield left him with a whole new set of obstacles to overcome.
He had witnessed some things and experienced some things that contribute to him having some post-traumatic stress syndrome.
He had a hard time really getting back up on his feet.
Ryan became estranged from his family. He also had a hard time holding down a job. And although he was lonely, Ryan found it nearly impossible to meet a woman who understood what he was going through.
Just as he had done in the past, he would just keep everything inside. He didn't have many social skills to meet women or to know what a healthy relationship was like himself because he wouldn't let anyone in.
He was a late bloomer when it came to that. He isolated a lot. I think that was his defense mechanism.
But everything changed when Ryan took a job as a dishwasher at a diner and befriended a kind young waitress named Erica Liljegren.
She starts talking to Ryan, and Ryan is a big listener, and she enjoys that. And slowly but surely, the relationship gets better and better.
Ryan and Erica discovered they had a lot in common. And as they opened up to one another about their traumatic experiences, they quickly formed an intense bond.
They certainly had challenging childhoods. I think that they were basically almost yin and yang in regards to Erica was more outgoing, more spunky, where Ryan was a little more reserved. It worked out well for both of them.
She was in love with him. She just thought he was the best thing in the world. You know, it is going to whisk her off her feet and save her, is how she thought of him.
With her history of abusive relationships, being with someone as inexperienced as Ryan was even more attractive to Erica. He made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before.
What he lived to do is make her happy. He was very much hooked on Erica because that's who he lost his virginity to.
Erica was the first woman in Ryan's life who made him feel like a man. He felt rejected by his own mother, and Erica became his whole world. The lovers moved in together and spent every waking moment in each other's arms.
Ryan and Erica became so engrossed with each other. They totally forgot about reality and how to keep a roof over their head. Neither one of them wanted to leave each other just to go to work.
Over the next several years, Ryan and Erica struggled to make ends meet.
Erica wasn't holding down jobs. I don't think Ryan was, and money was getting tight.
Then things took an unexpected turn when Ryan received a call from his estranged mother, Cindy, who'd gotten divorced from her rich husband. Cindy told Ryan she'd gone back to work as a caregiver at a hospital in Chesapeake, Virginia, and just gotten remarried to a kind-hearted fellow nurse named Tony Barone. Tony wasn't as wealthy as Cindy's previous husband, but had a passion for gambling, and he made enough money playing cards to provide him and Cindy a comfortable and fun lifestyle.
He loved to play poker, and he was really, really good at it. He could go to Vegas, make enough money playing poker that paid for his whole vacation there and still have money on the side to buy a car or whatever. I mean, that's how good he was.
But Cindy and Tony had just been hit with bad news. After a recent string of health problems, Cindy's doctor had given her a grim diagnosis.
She discovered that she had the breast cancer, and then she had to go on the chemo.
Knowing she would need extra help at the house while going through chemo, Cindy saw a silver lining to her sickness.
With Ryan and Erica going through financial difficulty in Florida, and Cindy dealing with her medical issues, all of this occurring at the same time, created the perfect opportunity for Cindy to bring the family back together.
Despite Ryan's feelings of abandonment, he couldn't pass up the chance to make things right. And having a free place to stay would give him and Erica the breathing room they desperately needed.
For Erica and Ryan, it was great to just not have to worry about rent, get back on their feet, but also to live this somewhat affluent lifestyle that Cindy was living.
The couple moved in with Cindy and Tony, and after her chemotherapy was complete, Cindy told the family she'd received some happy news. Her cancer had gone into remission. Everything seemed to have worked out perfectly. Ryan was finally home with his mother and his girlfriend by his side, while Erica felt blessed to be taken in by her new surrogate family. But life for this cozy household took a dark turn on the morning of July 20th, when Cindy and Tony unexpectedly didn't show up for work.
They don't call in sick. They're not on vacation.
For them to not call was just unheard of. They had never been absent from the job previously. They always showed up on time.
Could something have happened to the missing couple? And did Tony's gambling have anything to do with it?
They were mixed up in this seedy gambling world.
Were they running from a dangerous bookie? What were they running from?
Coming up, a traffic stop leads police to Cindy and Tony's missing car, and a surprising person behind the wheel.
And the driver identifies himself as Ryan Martinez.
But will everyone believe Ryan's story about where Cindy and Tony have gone?
I thought it was strange, and I'm thinking, it just didn't seem right.
Erica Liljegren was a down-on-her-luck waitress who fell in love with former combat medic Ryan Martinez.
Once she saw Ryan as that hero that she wanted to be with, and he wanted her, sparks started to fly.
After years of struggling to make ends meet, the lovers had moved in with Ryan's mother, Cindy, and her new husband, Tony Barone. And for the first few months, everything seemed to be working out great with both couples living under the same roof. But in the summer of 2013, the family would be torn apart when Cindy and Tony disappeared. It all began on the morning of July 20th, when Chesapeake police received a troubling phone call from the hospital where Cindy and Tony both worked as nurses. The married couple had missed their shifts that day with no explanation, causing their co-workers to become immediately alarmed.
Friends started calling, and Cindy's phone would just go to voicemail. Tony's phone would be voicemail as well. And after a while, that worry turned into fear.
Co-workers knew the couple lived with Cindy's adult son and his girlfriend. But when police drove out to the couple's home, there was no answer at the front door.
Cindy and Anthony generally drove a large SUV, and he looked and noticed that it was missing.
At first glance, it looked like the couple might have left town without telling anyone. But as the officer was driving away from the home, a car matching the description of Cindy and Tony's vehicle suddenly passed him.
The officer grunts the plates, and then when it comes back as Cindy as the owner, then he execute a stop.
As the officer approached the vehicle, he hoped it might be Cindy and Tony returning home. But to his surprise, the couple driving Cindy's car was 20 years younger than the missing nurses.
He cautiously asked for some identification to see who's driving the car. And the driver identifies himself as Liljegren-Martinez.
Ryan explained that he was Cindy's son, and the woman in the passenger seat was his girlfriend, Erica Liljegren. He and Erica lived with his mother and stepfather, so it wasn't unusual for them to borrow the car. Ryan told the officer that Cindy and Tony weren't missing. They'd simply left town to deal with a family emergency.
They wound up having to go out to Utah because Cindy's mother was deathly ill.
She had cancer. She had stage 4 cancer, lung cancer, because she was a heavy smoker. And CJ was concerned about that. She said if something happened, she'd have to go out there.
Ryan told the officers that his mother and stepfather's travel plans had come together at the last minute. He said Cindy had woken him up to ask for a ride to the airport because his grandmother's condition had worsened. He also claimed there was a good reason why Cindy and Tony had fallen off the radar.
The reason why nobody was able to get a hold of them was because they both forgot their cell phones at home.
It seems perfectly plausible because to have to leave with such quick notice, you're bound to forget something.
Ryan promised the officer that he'd have his mother check in with police as soon as he heard from her, and the officer let Ryan and Erica go on their way.
He says, okay, this makes sense. This is her son, lives with her, he's driving a vehicle.
It sounds like it's just a simple misunderstanding. They're alive and well in Utah.
Most of Tony and Cindy's co-workers were relieved to find out the couple was reportedly safe and sound, but not everyone was satisfied with Ryan's explanation.
Cindy's close friends felt that if something like that had indeed happened, that Cindy would have told them.
The thing of it was if it was an emergency and she ran out there, she's done something like that, and then she called me when she got out there. But this time, I thought it was strange, and I'm thinking, it just didn't seem right.
Police learned that Cindy and Tony had been known to occasionally take off for an unannounced weekend in Vegas. But even then, they always called their friends to let them know where they were going, and they never missed work. But what if something had happened to Cindy and Tony that prevented them from calling? What if Ryan was right, and his parents had traveled to Salt Lake City, but they'd been involved in some sort of accident?
The police decide that the best thing to do is to call every hospital that is there and see if they can find the whereabouts of Cindy and Tony.
They're calling every single hospital in Salt Lake City. Nothing turns up.
Authorities could also find no record of any police incidents involving the couple.
They're looking at every scenario in which they could have come up missing. And every avenue that they've explored turns up absolutely nothing.
A little over 24 hours passed with no clues to the couple's whereabouts. Then, police caught a break when they were finally able to get Cindy's mother on the phone. But she told police she hadn't seen Cindy or Tony. As far as she knew, her daughter and son-in-law had no plans to visit. And there hadn't been any emergencies with her cancer treatments. To detectives, the surprising news meant one of two things. Either Cindy and Tony had made up an elaborate story to hide where they were going, or Cindy's son Ryan was lying to them. Coming up, detectives begin to suspect there's more to the missing nurses than meets the eye.
That dark world of gambling where you're dealing with loan sharks. So these are some of the things that the police started to think about.
And police learn Ryan Martinez has a dark side.
He was obsessed with weapons, guns, and always talked about violence.
Erica Liljegren and Ryan Martinez had moved in with Ryan's mother, Cindy, and her husband, Tony, in Chesapeake, Virginia. But in July of 2013, Cindy and Tony vanished without a trace.
It's like a couple that was taken to the airport with the intention of going to Salt Lake City, Utah, all of a sudden drops off the face of the earth. And there is no evidence of their whereabouts.
This had become a full-blown missing persons investigation.
Ryan had told police that before his mother and Tony disappeared, they'd claimed they were going to visit Ryan's sick grandmother in Utah. But now it was clear that Ryan's grandmother had never made arrangements for her daughter or son-in-law to visit. And it was beginning to seem more and more likely that Ryan had lied. When they confronted him with what his grandmother had revealed, Ryan stuck firm to his original story.
He explains the same things that he had told the previous officer, that they were out of town, they left their cell phones, and that everything was fine.
Convinced Ryan was lying to them, police pressured him for more information.
And he said, well, which hospital are they in? He can't tell them a specific hospital. He said they left in such a haste. I don't remember the hospital. I said, well, do you remember the airline they flew on? I don't remember the airline either, but I'm sure they're okay.
Detectives weren't satisfied with Ryan's answers, but with no evidence suggesting foul play, they had no choice but to let Ryan go. Unsure where to turn next, police began by looking into every other possibility that might explain why Cindy and Tony were missing.
Perhaps they were on the run because they had engaged in some illegal activity.
Were they taking drugs from the pharmacy at the hospital where they worked? Were they selling these drugs?
But their fellow nurses strongly pushed against that theory.
All of the co-workers had nothing but good things to say about Cindy and Tony, that they were hard workers, they were enjoyable to work with, they loved their jobs.
Investigators also began to wonder if Tony's gambling had become an addiction. Police knew it wasn't uncommon for hooked gamblers to owe money to the wrong people.
That dark world of gambling where you're dealing with loan sharks and money.
They had to look into the possibility that perhaps he owed gambling debts, and the best thing to do was to run.
Police dug deeper into the couple's financial situation and soon learned from Cindy's close friends that she'd been having money troubles of her own. It seemed that when she had been married to her millionaire second husband, Cindy had developed some expensive tastes.
She liked the finer things in life. At the time, she pretty much had an unlimited amount to work with.
She didn't want to stop that just because she divorced him. So, in order for her to continue living that type of lifestyle, she wound up racking tens of thousands of dollars in debt on credit cards.
Between Cindy's debt and Tony's gambling obsession, it was beginning to seem like the couple might have had several reasons to disappear.
This could be a situation where they were looking to start a new life.
But where could they have gone? Since Ryan insisted he had no idea, police checked in with Cindy's other son, Christopher, who still lived in Florida. Christopher was alarmed to learn his mother was missing, and as investigators filled him in on what happened, there was one detail that made Christopher instantly suspicious.
Chris feels uneasy that Ryan has all the information about Cindy and he's the last person to have heard from her.
Christopher told police that his relationship with his older half-brother had always been strained. And ever since Ryan had come back from combat service in the Army, Christopher said that his personality had developed a more hostile edge.
Ryan is exhibiting a very dark behavior. He was obsessed with weapons and guns, always talked about violence.
But according to Christopher, his brother's grim persona wasn't the only thing that bothered him the last time they'd spoken. Instead, it was Ryan's sudden and unexplained obsession with their mother's finances.
Ryan had wanted to know how much money his mother was making from her job, and had also wanted to know about Cindy's life insurance policies.
Christopher said the conversation made him uncomfortable and more than a little suspicious of his older brother. And now that Cindy and Tony had inexplicably disappeared, Christopher told police he was certain Ryan had something to do with it.
Chris said, look, my mother would never have gone anywhere without letting me know, and something's wrong. And if you have to break down the door, you have my permission to do it.
Investigators immediately drove out to Cindy and Tony's house, hoping to turn up further evidence. Ryan answered the door with Erica by his side.
The police asked him if it would be okay for them to come into the residence, at which point Ryan allows them into the house. As soon as the officers step into the house, they immediately notice a smell.
The detective quickly thought, how in the world are they staying here and not smelling this odor?
One of the officers asks Ryan if it would be okay to search the house, at which point the officer follows his nose and starts to head upstairs.
When he opens the door to the master bedroom, the smell is overwhelming.
The officer noticed a pile of clothes that had been stuffed in front of the closet door.
He worked sort of serving as a guard to block the odor from drifting out.
The officer immediately kicks the clothes away, opens the door, and that's when the smell really rushes out at him. And he notices a pile of clothes laying over top the body.
Coming up, officers search the rest of the home for Ryan's mother, Cindy, and uncover an even more shocking scene.
When they pull it out, they see the blonde hair of a woman.
Erica Liljegren and Ryan Martinez were a down-on-their-luck couple desperate for a fresh start. But when Ryan's mother and stepfather mysteriously disappeared, an intense 2-day search ultimately led investigators back to the home they all shared, where a foul smell coming from a closet suggested this was no longer a missing persons case, but a probable murder.
The officer opens the door, and that's when the smell really rushes out at him. And he notices a pile of clothes laying over top the body.
In the closet was a human corpse.
It was the dead and decomposing body of Ryan's stepfather, Tony Barone.
The officer upstairs radios to the female officer downstairs and tells her exactly what he discovered, at which point she immediately raises her gun and points it at Ryan and Erica.
Evidence inside the closet suggested Ryan's stepfather had been shot.
They found 2 shell casings. They also found a very large dry blood spot underneath the body.
Downstairs, investigators discovered signs of another violent encounter.
They find bloody newspapers and cardboard on the kitchen floor.
Police continued their search throughout the entire house to try and find where Cindy could be. They decide to check into the garage, and that's when the smell of decaying flesh hits them like a brick.
The smell was coming from a blue tarp in a corner of the garage. Beneath it, police found the dead body of Ryan's mother, Cindy. It was clear she had been dead for several days.
It's bizarre how anyone could sit there and stay in a residence with 2 dead bodies that are rotting, blood all over the place, and act as if nothing happened.
Police took Ryan and Erica to the police station and split them up in separate interrogation rooms, hoping to get one of them to come clean about what happened.
Did one of them do it? Did the other one do it? Or did they participate as a team in committing the murder?
It was clear that Ryan wasn't interested in working with investigators.
The police set him down, try to ask him questions, who's been in the house, and he immediately asserts his rights to be silent.
But in her room across the hall, Erica was much more willing to talk. At first, Erica wouldn't tell police who had killed Ryan's parents, but she agreed to take them through the events that led to the double murder. According to Erica, it all began when she and Ryan first moved in with his parents a couple of years ago to help Cindy with her cancer treatments. But Erica claimed that the living situation had quickly grown tense, particularly between her and Ryan's mother. Erica said Cindy didn't think she was good enough for her son, but that wasn't the main issue. The issue at hand had been Cindy's belief that Erica was a thief.
Cindy started realizing that she was missing jewelry and missing other items, and that's when she had figured that it had to be Erica that was stealing it.
Erica said Cindy accused her of stealing several items from her home, though Erica always denied taking anything. Arguments would break out, but their fights never turned violent, and Ryan was often left in the middle, choosing not to take his girlfriend's side over his mother's. But things between the two women finally came to a head when Cindy had accused Erica of taking money from a locked cabinet drawer. Erica insisted she was innocent, but for Cindy, it had been the last straw.
She had Erica arrested.
Erica was found guilty of theft and spent the next 109 days in jail. Embarrassed, Cindy had kept quiet about the incident, and at the time, most people assumed Erica moved out on her own. But as far as Cindy was concerned, Ryan's girlfriend was out of their lives forever.
Cindy told Ryan she didn't want him to ever see her again.
Erica said Ryan had been shocked and heartbroken to see her sent to prison, and it only further damaged his relationship with Cindy.
I don't think he knows how to function by himself. I think he's lost. And when Erica went to jail, I think he felt even more lost.
When Erica got out of prison, she took a job as a cashier and began staying at cheap motels, but surprisingly, Ryan didn't follow her. Instead, he told Erica it didn't make sense for them both to be homeless. He thought if he stayed at the house, he could talk his mother into letting Erica come back.
They're going to keep that love no matter what it takes, and nobody can get in the way to stop it.
But Erica's money eventually ran out, and with Cindy showing no sign of budging, Ryan came up with a plan to keep his girlfriend out of having to live in squalor. He would smuggle Erica back into his mother's house without Cindy's knowledge.
Ryan picked her up and hid her in his bedroom, brought food up to her, drink, whatever she needed. When CJ and Tony weren't there, Erica would have free reign of the house. And when they knew it was close for either one of them to be home, she'd go back upstairs.
She would stay in the closet, which I thought, this is just ridiculous.
For more than 6 months, Erica lived in secret inside Ryan's closet. But that changed when one of Cindy's expensive handbags went missing. Though she didn't know Erica was living at the house, Cindy had grown suspicious that Ryan was still supporting her.
She goes stomping down the hall to Ryan's room and bangs on his door and starts yelling, "You took the bag, didn't you? You pawned my bag." And he's trying to say, "No, I didn't, no, I didn't."
From her hiding place in Ryan's closet, Erica said she'd heard Ryan and his mother get into a terrible fight. And Erica claimed she heard Cindy threaten to kill Ryan if she found out he'd been letting Erica back into the house.
The picture that Erica paints of Cindy is one that is very aggressive, that she would beat Ryan, argue with him, threaten him.
But when it came time to explain what happened next, Erica suddenly clammed up. And police weren't sure how to pressure her to talk.
This is Erica. Come on, reason with us. You're in this house. You're stepping over cardboard with blood on it. And you want us to believe that you didn't know that someone had been murdered?
In a daring attempt to get Erica to keep talking, detectives bluffed and told her that Ryan had already given them his side of the story. Cindy's body had been so decomposed, police didn't know exactly how she'd been killed, but they told Erica that Ryan claimed she had shot both his mother and his stepfather.
The detective pushes Erica further regarding the cause of Cindy's death. He's trying to lock her into a statement.
Investigators had hoped the made-up accusation would convince Erica to tell them the truth. But what it did was elicit a shocking admission.
They're starting to break her down, and she drops a bombshell.
Erica said, no, she wasn't shot because I stabbed her. This was the first admission that Erica had made, and it just comes out of nowhere.
Erica confessed that the fight over the missing handbag had sent Cindy charging into Ryan's room, where she discovered Erica hiding in the closet. Erica said Cindy chased her through the house, screaming for Tony to get his gun and shoot her. That made Erica run to the kitchen, where she grabbed a knife and turned it on her attacker.
Erica felt that the only way that she could protect herself was to come up behind Cindy and stab her in the neck.
She says, I stabbed her in the neck, and she dropped. I tried to help her and stop the bleeding, but it was too late.
Erica said the next thing she remembered was Tony coming into the room and seeing Cindy's dead body. Tony then ran upstairs for his gun in the bedroom closet. Ryan chased after him and grabbed the gun from Tony's hand before he could follow through on Cindy's threats.
He and Tony got into a scuffle.
Erica says that Tony attacked Ryan, and Ryan had to defend himself. And he shot Tony twice in self-defense.
But detectives were suspicious of Erica's self-defense claims.
The big question that the detectives had for Erica was, if all of this was done in self-defense, why didn't you call 911?
The fact that she and Ryan continued to stay in the same house with Cindy and Tony's dead bodies also made police doubt Erica's claims. The blood-soaked cardboard in the kitchen suggested that's where Cindy's body had laid for at least a day before being transported to the garage.
You have to be particularly depraved to walk around in a house with a dead lady laying in the middle of the floor. And for Ryan, his dead mother would coddled him his entire life. And you could just step across her body, cook eggs and bacon, and live life as usual. It's pretty incredible.
Erica's confession was enough to charge the two lovers with the double homicide. The question now was, what would a jury make of this bizarre crime? Coming up, Erica delivers a final shocking revelation in the courtroom.
The judge looks over to Erica and says, do you have anything to say? And she drops yet another bombshell.
For over 6 months, Liljegren-Martinez had been hiding his girlfriend, Erica Liljegren, under his mother's nose.
He was sneaking her into the house and hiding her out in the closet anytime Cindy and Tony were home.
But as police had just discovered, that wasn't all the couple had been hiding. The dead bodies of Ryan's mother and stepfather had been found inside their home. And Ryan and Erica had been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Erica had claimed the killings were in self-defense. But investigators believed the lovers had a darker and more desperate motive.
Erica, and probably Ryan as well, thought that by getting rid of his mom, that they could be together happily ever after.
Was their love that strong? Was the obsession that great that they would actually commit murder? to stay together?
But prosecutors were faced with a problem. Although they didn't believe Erica's story of self-defense, they didn't have any physical evidence that could firmly rule out the possibility she was telling the truth.
It isn't the slam dunk the prosecutors would want. Is this story partially true? Is it totally true? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle?
So instead of rolling the dice in court, prosecutors decided to offer both lovers a special kind of plea agreement. Ryan accepted the deal. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Erica's defense team also signaled that they were willing to take the deal. But when she entered her plea, Erica stunned the courtroom.
The judge looks over to Erica and say, "Do you have anything to say?" And she drops yet another bombshell.
She decides that there's another story to the whole situation.
Erica told the judge she'd been off her antidepressants when she confessed to Cindy's murder, and she'd been too confused to tell the true story of what happened. According to Erica, she wasn't the one who stabbed Ryan's mother to death. It was Ryan's stepfather, Tony Barone.
Tony kills Cindy because of his rage. Then because of him killing his mother, Ryan decides, okay, now I have to kill you, and he shot her.
Erica's story was met with disbelief, but despite her retracted confession, she'd already accepted the plea deal, which meant she was guilty of first-degree murder. She was given the same sentence as Ryan, 53 years in prison. Although Cindy and Tony's friends feel that justice has been served, the horrible truth of what really happened will always remain a mystery.
There's only 4 people who know what happened in that house, and 2 of them are gone.
But one thing is terribly clear. 2 beloved people are now dead because of the desperate actions of 2 deranged lovers.
All they could think about was being together, and I think that's what threw out any rational thinking.
How do you get a person out of your way? You killed them. And that's what they did.
On the morning of March 27th, 1995, Milan appeared no different from countless other spring mornings. The city, celebrated around the world as Italy's financial capital and one of the beating hearts of global fashion, was slowly awakening beneath a pale sky. Office workers hurried along elegant streets lined with historic buildings. Delivery trucks rolled through neighborhoods that balanced centuries of history with modern commerce. Cafes prepared the day's first espresso, while businessmen disappeared into polished office entrances carrying briefcases and tightly planned schedules. Nothing about that morning hinted that, within moments, one of Italy's most shocking murders would unfold in broad daylight, forever intertwining the name Gucci with one of the country's most infamous criminal investigations. At approximately 8:30 a.m., Maurizio Gucci arrived at his office building on Via Palestro. To anyone watching, it seemed like another ordinary business day. There were no visible signs of danger, no argument, no confrontation, no warning that someone had already decided this would be the final morning of his life. As Maurizio approached the entrance, a man moved toward him. There was little time to react. The gunman pulled out a firearm and opened fire. 3 bullets struck Maurizio in the back. He collapsed onto the entrance steps. Then, after he had already fallen, the attacker fired one final shot into his head. The attack lasted only seconds. Maurizio Gucci, grandson of the founder of one of the world's most recognizable luxury brands, died at the age of 46 before help could reach him. The violence did not end there. The gunman turned toward the building's doorman, Giuseppe Onorato, and fired twice. Unlike Maurizio, Honorado survived his injuries, becoming one of the few direct witnesses to the terrifying events of that morning. Before anyone nearby could stop him, the killer fled the scene, climbing into a waiting vehicle that disappeared into the streets of Milan almost as quickly as the shooting had begun. The silence that followed was almost as unsettling as the gunfire itself. Within minutes, police officers, emergency responders, and investigators flooded Via Palestro. The entrance of the office building transformed into an active crime scene. News spread rapidly across Milan and then beyond Italy's borders. The victim was not simply another businessman. He was Maurizio Gucci, a man whose surname represented luxury, prestige, and decades of Italian craftsmanship. Around the world, millions recognized the Gucci name even if they knew little about the complicated family behind it. At first glance, the murder carried all the hallmarks of a carefully planned, professional assassination. The killer had acted with speed and precision. The escape appeared organized. There was no robbery. Nothing suggested that the shooting had been random. Investigators immediately understood that whoever had ordered the attack wanted one specific outcome and had taken deliberate steps to ensure it happened. Yet identifying the people responsible would prove far more difficult. The earliest stages of the investigation produced more questions than answers. Detectives examined numerous possibilities. Could the murder have been connected to business disputes? Had organized crime become involved? Was the killing linked to rivalries within the fashion industry? Or was this an act driven by something deeply personal? Every theory seemed possible because Maurizio Gucci had lived a life surrounded by extraordinary wealth, public attention, and years of family conflict. Each possibility demanded careful examination, and each led investigators down complicated paths that initially produced very little. The physical evidence offered few immediate breakthroughs. There were no fingerprints capable of identifying the gunman. There was no DNA that could point investigators toward a suspect. No eyewitness could confidently identify the man who had fired the shots. What appeared at first to be an obvious targeted killing quickly became one of Italy's most frustrating unsolved cases. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. Months stretched into years. Despite the enormous public interest surrounding the case, investigators found themselves confronting one dead end after another. Every unanswered question fueled public speculation. Newspapers published competing theories. Television programs debated possible motives. The fact that the victim belonged to one of Italy's most famous families only intensified public fascination. People wondered whether the answer lay within the world of international business, among powerful financial interests, or somewhere much closer home. Behind every headline stood a family coping with irreversible loss. For Maurizio Gucci's loved ones, the murder was not merely a sensational news story dominating front pages across Europe. It was the sudden and violent death of a father, a former husband, and a member of a family whose private struggles had increasingly become public knowledge. The media often focused on the glamour associated with the Gucci name, but beneath that image existed complicated relationships marked by years of disagreement, separation, and emotional wounds that had never fully healed. As investigators continued searching for answers, one uncomfortable reality gradually emerged. Solving this case would require looking beyond the famous fashion house that had made the Gucci name known across the globe. Although Maurizio had once led the family business, he had already sold his remaining ownership years before his death. That fact complicated many of the earliest assumptions. If control of the company was no longer at stake, what motive remained strong enough to justify a carefully organized contract killing? The answer, investigators would eventually conclude, was not rooted primarily in fashion, corporate rivalry, or the struggle for control of a luxury empire. Instead, it pointed toward something far more personal. It pointed toward a marriage that had once symbolized elegance and privilege, but had deteriorated over years of separation and resentment. It pointed toward feelings of betrayal that survived long after divorce papers had been signed. It pointed toward concerns over money, status, and the possibility of a future that would permanently close the door on the life that once existed. Nearly 2 years would pass before a crucial breakthrough transformed the investigation. An anonymous tip would redirect detectives toward a suspect few had publicly expected. Telephone surveillance would uncover conversations that demanded closer examination. One name would lead to another, revealing an intricate chain of intermediaries that had carefully separated the person accused of ordering the murder from the man who ultimately pulled the trigger. What had initially appeared to be an impossible mystery slowly began to reveal a calculated conspiracy. The investigation would expose not only the identity of the alleged gunman, but also an organized sequence of individuals connected through a murder-for-hire arrangement. Each arrest would bring detectives one step closer to understanding how the assassination had been planned and, more importantly, why it had happened. In time, the murder of Maurizio Gucci would become one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in modern Italian history. It would capture worldwide attention not simply because of the victim's famous surname, but because the investigation uncovered a story in which wealth, personal betrayal, financial concerns, and shattered relationships converged with deadly consequences. Long after the crime scene on Via Palestro had been cleared and the headlines had faded, the case would remain a powerful reminder that behind even the most recognizable names can exist deeply personal conflicts capable of ending in irreversible tragedy. The story begins with 4 gunshots on a quiet Milan morning. But understanding how those shots came to be fired requires looking back at the life of the man who became their victim and the relationships that would ultimately define one of Italy's most unforgettable true crime cases. To understand why the murder of Maurizio Gucci would eventually become one of the most infamous criminal cases in modern Italian history, it is necessary to look beyond the crime scene on Via Palestro and examine the life that preceded it. While the shooting itself lasted only a matter of seconds, the circumstances that investigators would later uncover had developed over decades. They were shaped by family expectations, personal relationships, financial decisions, and emotional conflicts that slowly transformed what had once appeared to be a glamorous life into one marked by profound personal turmoil. The story of Maurizio Gucci is therefore not simply the story of a wealthy businessman. It is the story of a man born into extraordinary privilege, carrying the weight of one of the most recognizable family names in the world, while navigating pressures that few people could truly understand. Maurizio Gucci was born in 1948 into the family that had created one of Italy's greatest luxury brands. He was the grandson of Guccio Gucci, the founder of Gucci, a company whose name had become synonymous with elegance, craftsmanship, and prestige. Long before Maurizio reached adulthood, the Gucci surname had evolved into far more than a family name. It represented an international symbol of success, attracting admiration from customers around the world and establishing itself as one of the defining names in luxury fashion. Being born into such a family offered opportunities that many could only imagine. It also brought expectations that were impossible to escape. Every member of the Gucci family existed under the shadow of an extraordinary legacy. Decisions affecting the company were never viewed as merely business matters. They carried implications for the family's identity, reputation, and future. Maurizio inherited not only wealth and privilege, but also the responsibility of preserving a name that had already become part of Italian cultural history. As the years passed, Maurizio gradually assumed a more significant role within the family business. During the 1980s, After years of disputes among members of the Gucci family, he eventually became the head of Gucci. However, this achievement came during a period of instability rather than prosperity. The company was no longer defined solely by its reputation for luxury. Behind the polished storefronts and iconic products, internal conflicts had begun to erode the unity that had once supported the business. The prolonged power struggles within the Gucci family became a defining feature of this period. Relatives disagreed over leadership, authority, and the direction of the company. These disputes extended over many years, creating an atmosphere in which personal relationships became increasingly strained. Rather than presenting a united front, family members found themselves divided by competing visions and conflicting interests. Such prolonged internal conflict inevitably weakened the company itself. Decisions became more difficult, tensions intensified, and the business entered a period of financial difficulty that reflected the instability behind the scenes. For Maurizio, becoming the head of Gucci did not mean inheriting an uncomplicated success. Instead, he found himself leading a company already burdened by years of internal disagreement. Every major decision carried enormous pressure, and the expectations attached to the Gucci name remained as demanding as ever. While the public continued to associate the brand with luxury and exclusivity, the reality within the family had become increasingly complicated. The turning point arrived in 1993. After years of conflict and financial challenges, Maurizio sold all of his remaining shares in Gucci to the investment group Investcorp for approximately $170 million. From a business perspective, it represented one of the most significant moments in the history of the company. For the first time since its founding by Gucci, the Gucci family no longer owned the fashion house that bore its own name. The symbolic importance of that decision cannot be overstated. Although the Gucci brand would continue to exist and eventually flourish under new ownership, the family's direct connection to the company had effectively come to an end. The business that had defined generations of the Gucci family had passed into entirely different hands. Mauricio's role within the corporate history of Gucci was over. Yet ending his ownership of the company did not mean that Maurizio disappeared from public attention. His surname remained instantly recognizable, and his personal life continued to attract interest. In many ways, the conclusion of his business relationship with Gucci marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be shaped less by corporate leadership and more by personal relationships. More than 2 decades earlier, in 1972, Maurizio had married Patricia Reggiani. At the time, their marriage attracted considerable public attention. Together, they were widely viewed as one of Italy's most glamorous couples, representing wealth, influence, and sophistication. Their appearances reflected the image many associated with a world of high fashion, elegance, privilege, and a social prominence. Over the years, Maurizio and Patricia welcomed 2 daughters into their family, Alessandra Gucci and Allegra Gucci. Like many parents, they built a family life that, from the outside, appeared successful and stable. Public attention naturally followed them because of the Gucci name, reinforcing the perception that they occupied a privileged place within Italian high society. However, appearances often conceal realities that outsiders cannot see. As time passed, the marriage gradually deteriorated. The reasons behind the breakdown extended over many years, ultimately leading to a separation that permanently altered both of their lives. By 1985, Maurizio made a decision that fundamentally changed the course of their relationship. He left the family home and did not return. That departure marked more than a temporary separation. It represented the beginning of a new phase in Mauricio's personal life. After leaving, he began a relationship with Paola Franchi. For Patricia Reggiani, This development carried profound emotional consequences. According to the documented facts of the case, she felt deeply betrayed by Mauricio's decision. The marriage that had once symbolized elegance and influence had become defined by separation and emotional pain. The years that followed were characterized by continued distance rather than reconciliation. Although they remained legally married for some time after their separation, the relationship itself had effectively ended. Eventually, in 1994, the divorce was finalized, formally bringing their marriage to a close. The legal settlement that accompanied the divorce ensured that Patricia continued to receive substantial financial support. Under the agreement, she was entitled to approximately $1.47 million annually. Financially, the settlement appeared significant. Nevertheless, investigators would later conclude that money alone did not eliminate the emotional tensions that had developed over nearly a decade of separation. One issue, in particular, became increasingly important. After separating from Patricia, Maurizio continued his relationship with Paola Franchi. As time passed, the possibility that he might eventually marry her became increasingly real. According to investigators, this prospect deeply concerned Patricia. The concern was not limited to emotional betrayal alone. She also feared that Mauricio's remarriage could reduce her financial position and diminish the social status she had long associated with being connected to the Gucci family. These concerns would later become central to understanding the prosecution's theory of motive. Investigators ultimately concluded that the alleged motive behind the murder did not arise from a single grievance, but from several interconnected factors. Feelings of betrayal after the collapse of the marriage, combined with jealousy regarding Mauricio's relationship with Paola Franchi. At the same time, concerns surrounding financial security and social standing created additional sources of resentment. Rather than existing independently, these emotions appeared to reinforce one another over time. An important factual distinction also emerged during the investigation. Although Maurizio had once controlled the Gucci company, investigators found no evidence that ownership of the fashion house itself directly motivated the murder. By the time of his death in 1995, Maurizio had already sold all of his ownership interests 2 years earlier. Consequently, the case would ultimately focus not on corporate power or control of the Gucci empire, but on personal relationships and their consequences. Looking back, the contrast between Mauricio's public image and his private circumstances is striking. To the outside world, he remained a member of one of the most celebrated families in fashion history, carrying a surname recognized across continents. Yet privately, his life had undergone dramatic transformation. The family business was no longer under Gucci ownership. His marriage had ended after years of separation. He had begun building a new relationship while leaving behind another that had once seemed inseparable from his identity. Financial agreements had resolved legal obligations, but had not erased emotional wounds. By early 1995, Maurizio Gucci appeared to be moving forward with his life. His role within the Gucci company belonged to the past, and his personal future seemed increasingly tied to the new chapter he had begun after his divorce. From the outside, it may have seemed that years of conflict had finally reached their conclusion. Yet beneath the surface, unresolved resentment and lingering grievances had not disappeared. According to the conclusions investigators would later reach, those tensions continued to exist long after the marriage itself had legally ended. None of this suggested that violence was inevitable. Divorce, family disputes, and financial disagreements occur every day without leading to tragedy. Nevertheless, these documented events formed the background against which investigators would eventually interpret the shocking murder on Via Palestro. When detectives later reconstructed the circumstances surrounding Mauricio's death, they would repeatedly return to this history, not because it offered immediate proof of guilt, but because it provided essential context for understanding why attention ultimately shifted away from theories involving organized crime or business rivals and toward a far more personal explanation. 1 year after the divorce, on what should have been another ordinary Monday morning in Milan, Maurizio Gucci walked toward the entrance of his office as he had likely done many times before. He could not have known that every decision, every relationship, and every conflict that had shaped the previous decades of his life would soon become the focus of one of Italy's most closely watched murder investigations. The world knew him as the heir to a legendary fashion dynasty. Within moments, he would become the victim at the center of a mystery that would captivate investigators, journalists, and the public for years to come. By the morning of March 27, 1995, nothing outwardly suggested that Maurizio Gucci's life was about to end in violence. The events that had shaped the previous decade, his departure from his marriage, the eventual divorce, the sale of his ownership in Gucci, and the beginning of a new relationship, had all become part of his past. The disputes that had once surrounded the family business no longer placed him at the center of corporate power, and there was no public indication that he faced an immediate threat. Like countless other professionals in Milan, he began the day expecting nothing more extraordinary than another morning at work. Yet before the city had fully settled into its daily rhythm, those expectations would be shattered by an attack that unfolded with chilling speed and precision. It was approximately 8:30 in the morning when Maurizio arrived at his office building located at 20 Via Palestro in Milan. The neighborhood was one of the city's distinguished business districts, where elegant buildings and steady morning activity created an atmosphere of routine normality. Employees arrived for work, pedestrians passed along the sidewalks, and another business day quietly began. Nothing about the surroundings appeared unusual. There were no signs of panic, no visible confrontation waiting outside the entrance, and no indication that someone had carefully chosen that exact place and time to carry out a deadly plan. Maurizio approached the entrance of the building on foot. Like every ordinary arrival in an office, the movement lasted only a few moments. He stepped toward the entrance without any apparent awareness that someone nearby had already been waiting for him. According to the established facts of the case, as he reached the building, a man approached him. The encounter was brief. There was no documented conversation, no prolonged exchange, and no opportunity for Maurizio to escape. Without warning, the attacker drew a firearm. The first shots were fired almost immediately. 3 bullets struck Maurizio in the back. The force of the gunfire caused him to collapse near the entrance of the office building. Before there was any chance for intervention, before anyone could meaningfully react to what had just occurred, the gunman took one final step to ensure the attack achieved its intended outcome. As Maurizio lay on the ground, the attacker fired a 4th shot into his head. The assassination lasted only seconds. Maurizio Gucci died at the scene. He was 46 years old. For those nearby, the attack transformed an ordinary Monday morning into a scene of unimaginable violence. The entrance that moments earlier had welcomed employees into another workday had become the location of a homicide carried out in broad daylight. The speed of the shooting left virtually no opportunity for anyone to intervene. By the time witnesses fully understood what had happened, the victim had already sustained fatal injuries. The gunman, however, was not yet finished. After shooting Maurizio, the attacker turned his attention toward the building's doorman, Giuseppe Onorato. Onorato had been present during the attack and suddenly found himself facing the armed assailant. The gunman fired twice at him. Unlike Maurizio, Onorato survived the shooting despite being seriously wounded. His survival would become an important aspect of the investigation because he remained one of the few individuals directly caught in the unfolding violence. Although the available evidence did not allow investigators to identify the shooter immediately. Honorado's survival ensured that the crime had not unfolded entirely without living witnesses. Once both victims had been shot, the attacker moved quickly to escape. The efficiency of the operation suggested careful preparation. Rather than fleeing on foot without a plan, the gunman reached a waiting getaway vehicle. The driver was already in position, allowing the attacker to leave the scene within moments. The vehicle disappeared into the streets of Milan before police could intercept it. The attack had been completed with remarkable speed. Its execution left investigators with an unmistakable impression that this was not an impulsive act of violence. Every element of the shooting appeared deliberate. The killer had arrived prepared, selected a precise moment when Maurizio would be vulnerable, carried out the attack with lethal accuracy, and escaped using transportation arranged in advance. Even without knowing who was responsible, detectives immediately recognized that considerable planning had almost certainly preceded the murder. As emergency responders arrived, attention shifted from the fleeing attacker to the victims left behind. Medical personnel could do nothing to save Maurizio Gucci. His injuries were fatal, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The contrast between his ordinary arrival at work and the sudden brutality of his death underscored the shocking nature of the crime. Only minutes had separated a routine morning commute from a carefully executed assassination. Police officers quickly secured the area surrounding the office entrance. Investigators began documenting every available piece of physical evidence. The crime scene became the center of an intensive investigation whose importance was immediately apparent. This was not simply another homicide. The victim belonged to one of Italy's most internationally recognized families, ensuring that every development would attract extraordinary public attention. News of the shooting spread rapidly throughout Milan, as details emerged confirming that the victim was Maurizio Gucci. Journalists gathered outside the crime scene. Television crews, newspaper reporters, and photographers sought information about what had happened and why. The murder quickly became national news before attracting widespread international coverage. Around the world, the Gucci name was already associated with luxury fashion, making the assassination particularly shocking to audiences unfamiliar with the private struggles that had marked Mauricio's later years. In the earliest hours following the shooting, however, very little was known. Investigators could establish the sequence of events that had occurred outside the office building, but understanding the motive behind the attack proved far more complicated. There had been no robbery. Nothing suggested that the attacker intended to steal money or personal belongings. Maurizio had been targeted directly, indicating that the objective had been his death rather than financial gain through theft. This immediately broadened the range of possible explanations. Because Maurizio had once led the Gucci company, detectives considered whether business disputes could have contributed to the murder. They also examined the possibility of organized crime involvement, recognizing that professional contract killings sometimes displayed characteristics similar to those seen on Via Palestro. Rivalries within the fashion industry also entered early discussions, as investigators attempted to identify anyone who might have benefited from Mauricio's death. At the same time, detectives could not ignore the possibility that the motive might be deeply personal rather than professional. At that stage, however, every theory remained speculative. The crime scene itself offered surprisingly little that could immediately identify those responsible. The attack had unfolded too quickly for clear identification of the gunman. The escape had been carefully organized. The shooter had vanished almost as quickly as he had appeared, leaving investigators with the difficult task of reconstructing an operation that seemed specifically designed to conceal those who planned it. The survival of Giuseppe Onorato provided investigators with an important witness. Yet even that did not produce an immediate breakthrough. Although he had experienced the terrifying events firsthand, the circumstances of the shooting and the rapid escape limited the amount of information available to investigators. The case would not be solved through a single eyewitness account or one decisive piece of evidence discovered at the scene. Instead, detectives faced the beginning of what would become a long and frustrating investigation. The public, meanwhile, searched for explanations of its own. Newspapers questioned whether the murder reflected unresolved conflicts connected to Mauricio's past. Television discussions explored numerous possibilities, often emphasizing the extraordinary prominence of the Gucci family. Every new report generated additional speculation, but speculation could not replace evidence. Investigators remained committed to following documented facts rather than public assumptions. The circumstances surrounding the attack also highlighted another important reality. Whoever had organized the assassination appeared determined to leave as little trace as possible. The gunman had arrived only when Maurizio reached the office. The attack itself was completed in moments. The escape vehicle had been waiting nearby. These details suggested coordination rather than spontaneity. Detectives increasingly believed they were dealing not with an individual acting alone and sudden anger, but with a carefully arranged operation involving planning before the day of the murder. Yet planning alone could not reveal the identities of those responsible. The crime scene represented only the beginning of the investigation, not its conclusion. Every bullet fired outside the office building created another question that detectives would spend months attempting to answer. Who had selected Maurizio as the target? Who had recruited the gunman? Who had arranged the waiting vehicle? And, perhaps most importantly, who stood to benefit from the death of a man who no longer controlled the family business that had made his name famous? These questions remained unanswered as March turned into April, and April into the months that followed. Although the murder itself had been brief, uncovering the truth behind it would require investigators to look far beyond the events of that single morning. The carefully executed attack on Via Palestro had eliminated Maurizio Gucci in less than a minute. But identifying the people responsible would demand patience, persistence, and an investigation that would ultimately extend for nearly 2 years before a crucial breakthrough finally began to unravel the conspiracy hidden behind those 4 fatal gunshots. The assassination of Maurizio Gucci shocked Italy from the moment it occurred. But for the investigators assigned to the case, the crime scene on Via Palestro was only the beginning of a far longer journey. While the attack itself had lasted only seconds, solving it would require months of painstaking work, constant reevaluation of evidence, and the willingness to question every possible motive. The murder had been carried out with remarkable precision. The gunman had approached his target without hesitation, fired 4 fatal shots, wounded the doorman Giuseppe Onorato, and escaped in a waiting vehicle before authorities had any opportunity to respond. Nothing about the operation suggested panic or improvisation. Instead, detectives believed they were confronting a carefully organized contract killing, yet recognizing that possibility was very different from proving it. In the days following the murder, investigators found themselves standing before a crime that appeared professionally executed but offered remarkably few immediate clues. Their challenge was not simply identifying the gunman. They also needed to determine who had ordered the killing, why Maurizio had become the target, and how such a carefully coordinated attack had been organized without leaving obvious evidence behind. The first stage of the investigation focused on understanding the victim's life and identifying anyone who might have had a motive to wish him harm. Maurizio Gucci was no ordinary businessman. His surname carried worldwide recognition, and his career had placed him at the center of one of Italy's most famous corporate dynasties. Naturally, investigators began by examining whether his business history had created dangerous enemies. although Maurizio had sold all of his remaining shares in Gucci to Investcorp in 1993. Detectives could not immediately dismiss the possibility that disputes connected to his years within the company had somehow contributed to the murder. Internal conflicts had long characterized the Gucci family, and the years of power struggles that preceded the sale of the business had been well documented. Investigators therefore reviewed the possibility that unresolved disagreements are lingering. Resentment from those years might have escalated into violence. At that stage, every avenue remained open because eliminating possibilities too early could allow the real motive to remain hidden. Another theory centered on organized crime. The efficiency of the assassination naturally invited comparisons to professional contract killings. The attacker had selected a public location but completed the shooting before anyone could effectively intervene. The escape vehicle had been waiting in advance, indicating coordination between multiple participants. Such characteristics were consistent with crimes in which the individual carrying out the shooting acted on behalf of someone else. Detectives therefore examined whether organized criminal groups or mafia involvement could explain the murder. They explored whether Maurizio had any documented connections or disputes that might have drawn the attention of such organizations. However, as the investigation progressed, no evidence emerged that directly supported organized crime as the source of the assassination. The theory remained possible in principle, but detectives could not substantiate it with the available facts. Investigators also considered whether competition within the fashion industry might have played a role. Maurizio Gucci remained one of the most recognizable figures associated with the Gucci name, despite no longer owning the company. Given the enormous financial stakes surrounding international luxury fashion, detectives examined whether business rivals or commercial interests might somehow have benefited from his death. Yet once again, evidence failed to support the hypothesis. Maurizio had already relinquished ownership of Gucci 2 years before the shooting. Although his surname remained famous, investigators found no factual basis connecting the murder to contemporary competition within the fashion industry itself. The possibility of a deeply personal motive, therefore, remained equally important. Detectives examined Mauricio's relationships, his family history, and the significant changes that had occurred in his private life during the previous decade. His marriage to Patricia Reggiani had ended after years of separation, and the divorce had been finalized only 1 year before the murder. Investigators were aware that personal relationships often generated motives far stronger than financial disagreements alone. Nevertheless, at this early stage, there was still no evidence capable of directing the investigation toward any particular individual. Detectives could identify potential motives, but they still lacked proof connecting anyone to the carefully executed attack outside the office building. As weeks became months, optimism gradually gave way to frustration. Every homicide investigation depends upon evidence, and in this case, the available physical evidence proved exceptionally limited. Detectives searched for fingerprints capable of identifying the shooter or anyone who had handled the weapon. None were recovered that could solve the case. They examined every available forensic opportunity, yet no usable DNA evidence emerged to identify those responsible. Investigators also interviewed witnesses, hoping that someone had clearly observed either the gunman or the getaway vehicle. Although people had been present in the area, the speed of the attack and the efficiency of the escape meant that no eyewitness could confidently identify the killer. Every major investigative path appeared to reach the same disappointing conclusion. There simply was not enough evidence to establish who had carried out the murder or who had ordered it. The absence of progress became increasingly difficult, both for investigators and for the public. Maurizio Gucci's murder had generated extraordinary international attention from the very beginning. Newspapers regularly published updates, often discussing possible motives and competing theories. Television programs examined the crime from every conceivable angle. Yet despite widespread media coverage, the investigation itself remained largely at a standstill. Detectives understood that public speculation could never substitute for evidence. Every assumption required verification, and every theory had to be tested against documented facts rather than popular opinion. This disciplined approach meant accepting that, despite enormous public interest, the case remained unsolved. Nearly 2 years passed without a decisive breakthrough. For many investigations, the passage of time complicates rather than simplifies the search for answers. Memories fade, witnesses become more difficult to locate, and physical evidence rarely improves with age. Yet in the Maurizio Gucci investigation, the turning point would arrive not because of newly discovered forensic evidence, but because someone chose to provide investigators with information they had not previously possessed. In 1997, detectives received an anonymous tip. Although the identity of the person providing the information was not publicly established, the content of the tip dramatically altered the direction of the investigation. For the first time, attention shifted toward Mauricio's former wife, Patricia Reggiani. Until then, investigators had examined numerous theories without identifying evidence sufficient to focus on a single suspect. The anonymous information encouraged detectives to take a much closer look at Patricia's activities and relationships. Receiving a tip, however, did not constitute proof. Responsible investigators could not base arrests solely on anonymous allegations. Instead, the information served as the beginning of a new investigative phase. Detectives sought independent evidence capable of confirming or disproving the claims they had received. The challenge remained the same as before. Transform suspicion into evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. One of the most significant investigative tools employed during this period involved telephone surveillance. As detectives monitored communications connected to the emerging leads, they began identifying conversations that appeared increasingly suspicious. Individually, no single conversation resolved the case. Collectively, however, the communications encouraged investigators to look more closely at the relationships between several individuals whose names gradually became central to the inquiry. The investigation soon led detectives to Giuseppina Pina Orima, a close friend of Patricia Reggiani. As investigators examined the available evidence, Pina emerged as a crucial figure linking multiple participants. According to the conclusions eventually presented in court, she acted as the intermediary who helped arrange contact between the alleged mastermind and those responsible for carrying out the murder. This represented a critical development because contract killings frequently rely upon intermediaries to distance the individual ordering the crime from the person who ultimately commits it, rather than direct communication between planner and gunman. Layers of participants reduce the risk that investigators can easily identify the origin of the conspiracy. As detectives continued following these connections, another name emerged: Ivano Savioni. According to the prosecution's reconstruction of events, Savioni became involved after being contacted through Pina Orima. His role further illustrated the complexity of the alleged murder-for-hire arrangement. Rather than ending with one intermediary, the chain extended further, making the investigation considerably more difficult during its earliest stages. Each additional participant increased the distance between the alleged organizer and the eventual shooter. The investigation next identified Benedetto Serrallo. According to the evidence later presented in court, Serrallo was the individual who carried out the assassination itself. Investigators concluded that he was the gunman who had approached Maurizio Gucci outside the office building on the morning of March 27th. 1995 fired the fatal shots, wounded Giuseppe Onorato, and fled the scene. Identifying the alleged shooter represented an enormous breakthrough. But detectives still needed to understand how he had escaped so efficiently after completing the attack. That question led investigators to another participant, Orazio Cicala. According to the prosecution, Cicala served as the getaway driver, waiting nearby to transport the gunman away from the crime scene immediately after the shooting. This finding aligned with investigators' earliest observations that the escape appeared carefully planned rather than spontaneous. The presence of a waiting vehicle had always suggested coordination between at least two individuals. Now detectives believed they understood who had driven that vehicle and how the escape had been organized. When investigators reconstructed the alleged conspiracy, the overall structure became much clearer. According to the prosecution's case, Patrizia Reggiani promised approximately 600 million Italian lire, roughly equivalent to 350,000 to 400,000 US dollars at the time, in exchange for the murder of her former husband. Rather than contacting a gunman herself, she allegedly relied upon Pina Orima. Pina, in turn, approached Ivano Savioni. Savioni then arranged for Benedetto Serrallo to carry out the shooting, while Orazio Cicala provided transportation during the escape. Each participant occupied a separate position within the chain, creating multiple layers between the alleged organizer and the individual who actually fired the weapon. For investigators, this structure explained why solving the murder had proven so difficult during the first 2 years. The person accused of planning the crime had not allegedly carried it out personally. The gunman had not allegedly been recruited directly by the alleged mastermind. Every stage introduced another intermediary capable of concealing the identities of those above and below them. Without the anonymous tip and the subsequent telephone surveillance, detectives might never have uncovered the complete sequence connecting each participant. Armed with the evidence developed during this renewed investigation, authorities moved decisively. Patrizia Reggiani, Giuseppina Pina Auriemma, Ivano Savioni, Benedetto Ceraulo, and Orazio Cicala were all arrested. What had begun as an apparently unsolvable assassination had evolved into a case centered upon an alleged murder-for-hire conspiracy involving multiple individuals, each accused of performing a distinct role within the operation. The arrests marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. Detectives believed they had reconstructed how the conspiracy functioned. Yet every conclusion would soon face rigorous examination inside a courtroom. Prosecutors now carried the responsibility of presenting evidence capable of proving each participant's alleged role beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys would challenge those conclusions, scrutinize the investigation, and dispute the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence. After nearly 2 years of unanswered questions, the mystery surrounding Maurizio Gucci's murder was finally approaching its next decisive stage, not on the streets of Milan, but before the judges and lawyers who would determine whether the investigation had truly uncovered the people responsible for one of Italy's most notorious contract killings. By the time the case of Maurizio Gucci's murder reached the courtroom in 1998, the investigation had already transformed from a shocking, unsolved assassination into one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Italy. What had begun on a quiet morning in Milan on Via Palestro, with 4 gunshots and a rapid escape, had evolved into a complex legal case involving multiple defendants, an alleged murder-for-hire network, and a narrative that captivated both the Italian public and international media. The courtroom would now become the place where investigators' findings would be tested, challenged, and ultimately judged according to the standards of criminal law. The trial drew enormous attention from the outset. Maurizio Gucci was not only a murder victim, but also a member of one of the most recognizable fashion families in the world. The Gucci name carried global cultural weight, and the idea that his death might have been orchestrated through a paid killing added an additional layer of fascination and disbelief. Reporters filled the courtroom, and every hearing was followed closely by newspapers and television networks across Italy and beyond. Yet behind the media presence, the court was tasked with something far more serious than public interest, determining whether the prosecution could prove, beyond reasonable doubt, that the individuals accused were responsible for planning and executing the murder. The prosecution's case was built gradually, assembling multiple strands of evidence into a single narrative. One of the most discussed elements was a diary entry attributed to Patricia Reggiani. In it, shortly after Maurizio Gucci's death, she had written the word paradise. Prosecutors did not present this as definitive proof of guilt on its own, but they argued that it carried significance when viewed alongside the broader context of the investigation. It became one piece in a larger mosaic rather than a standalone conclusion. More substantial weight came from the testimonies of alleged participants in the conspiracy. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, individuals involved in the chain of communication and execution provided statements that connected Patricia Reggiani to the planning of the murder. These testimonies described a structure in which Patricia allegedly expressed her desire to have her former husband killed and authorized payment for the act. However, as in many criminal cases involving multiple defendants, these statements were also subject to scrutiny by defense attorneys, who questioned their reliability, motivations, and consistency. Telephone records and surveillance material also played a central role in the prosecution's argument. Investigators had monitored communications between key individuals after receiving the anonymous tip in 1997, and prosecutors presented these records as evidence of coordination and indirect communication among the defendants. While no single call explicitly documented a direct order for murder, the prosecution argued that the pattern of communication, when considered alongside other evidence, supported the conclusion that the defendants were connected through a coordinated plan. Financial transactions were also examined. According to the prosecution, payments and financial arrangements were consistent with the structure of a paid killing. The alleged amount involved in the contract was approximately 600 million Italian lire, equivalent to roughly 350,000 to 400,000 US dollars at the time. Prosecutors argued that the flow of money through intermediaries supported their theory that the murder had been organized through a staged chain of participants rather than a spontaneous act of violence. Each transfer, in their view, helped establish the existence of an organized agreement to carry out the killing. Another key aspect of the prosecution's case was the relationship between Patricia Reggiani and Giuseppina "Pina" Arima. Prosecutors described Pina as the intermediary who connected Patricia to the individuals who ultimately arranged and carried out the murder. According to the prosecution, this relationship was essential to the structure of the alleged conspiracy, because it allowed Patricia to distance herself from the operational details while still influencing the outcome. The court examined communications and interactions between the two women as part of its assessment of how the alleged plan developed over time. Throughout the trial, Patricia Reggiani denied directly ordering the murder of her former husband. Her defense did not dispute the tragic outcome of the events on Via Palestro, but it challenged the prosecution's interpretation of her involvement. The defense questioned whether the evidence truly demonstrated a deliberate agreement to Plan A murder-for-hire scheme, or whether the connections between the defendants were being interpreted too broadly. As is typical in complex conspiracy cases, the central legal question was not only what happened, but whether the prosecution could definitively prove intent and coordination beyond reasonable doubt. The other defendants also faced intense scrutiny. Benedetto Cirallo, identified by investigators as the gunman, Orazio Sakala, alleged to have acted as the getaway driver, Ivano Savioni, described as an intermediary, and Pina Orima, accused of facilitating communication between Patricia and the others. All faced charges connected to the same alleged conspiracy. Each defendant's role was examined separately, yet all were linked through the prosecution's overall reconstruction of the chain of events leading to the murder. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became the arena in which competing interpretations of the same facts were presented. On one side, prosecutors argued that the evidence formed a coherent and interconnected narrative of planning, coordination, and execution. On the other side, defense attorneys challenged whether the evidence truly met the threshold required for criminal conviction, emphasizing gaps, ambiguities, and alternative interpretations of the same communications and testimonies. After extensive proceedings, the court reached its verdict. The judges concluded that the prosecution had successfully demonstrated the existence of a coordinated murder-for-hire arrangement involving all defendants. The ruling accepted the central framework of the prosecution's case, that Maurizio Gucci had been targeted and killed as part of a paid assassination organized through a chain of intermediaries. The sentences reflected the court's findings. Patricia Reggiani was sentenced to 29 years in prison, later reduced to 26 years. She was identified as the central figure accused of organizing the murder. Benedetto Cirallo received a life sentence as the individual responsible for carrying out the shooting. Orazio Sakala was sentenced to 28 years for his role as the alleged getaway driver. Ivano Savioni received a sentence of 26 years for his involvement as an intermediary. Giuseppina Pina Orima was sentenced to 25 years for her role in facilitating the communication between the parties involved. The verdict marked the legal conclusion of a case that had begun with a sudden act of violence on a Milan Street 3 years earlier. What had initially appeared to be an unsolved assassination had been transformed through investigation and trial into a legally recognized conspiracy involving multiple participants in a structured chain of responsibility. For the Italian justice system, the case represented the successful resolution of a high-profile murder that had once seemed almost impossible to solve. For the public, it confirmed suspicions that the crime had not been random but carefully organized. And for the individuals convicted, it marked the beginning of long prison sentences that reflected the court's assessment of their roles in the death of Maurizio Gucci. Yet, even after the verdict was delivered and the courtroom proceedings concluded, the case did not fade from public memory. Instead, it remained one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in modern Italian history, not only because of its legal outcome, but because of the extraordinary contrast between the world of fashion, wealth, and prestige associated with the Gucci name and the deeply personal conflict that ultimately led to violence. The trial closed one chapter of the case, but its impact would continue far beyond the courtroom, shaping public understanding of the events for years to come and setting the stage for how the story of Maurizio Gucci would later be retold to a global audience. With the conclusion of the trial in 1998, the legal system had formally reached its verdict on the murder of Maurizio Gucci. But the story itself did not end at the courtroom doors. In many ways, the final judgment marked the beginning of a new phase in the public life of the case, one shaped by media interpretation, cultural memory, and the long shadow cast by a crime that had once shocked Italy and reverberated across the world. The events on Via Palestro had already become more than a criminal investigation. They had become a narrative about family legacy, personal betrayal, and the dangerous intersection between wealth and emotional conflict. For Patricia Reggiani, the central figure accused of orchestrating the murder of her former husband, life after conviction was defined by imprisonment and public scrutiny. Italian media gave her a striking nickname, La Vedova Nera, the Black Widow. The label reflected not only the allegations against her, but also the public fascination with her role in a crime that seemed to combine elements of personal resentment and calculated planning. Within the prison system, however, the reality of her life was far removed from the dramatic image constructed in headlines. She was serving a lengthy sentence, initially set at 29 years and later reduced to 26 years. Following the court's ruling that she had been the central figure behind the conspiracy that led to Maurizio Gucci's death. During her time in prison, Patricia became known for a statement that drew significant attention in Italy. When offered the possibility of early release through participation in a work program, she refused, reportedly saying, "I have never worked in my life and I do not intend to start now." The comment was widely reported and interpreted in different ways by the public, reflecting both her personal identity and the privileged lifestyle she had once lived. Eventually, however, she changed her position and did participate in work activities within the prison system, a step that contributed to her eligibility for reduced sentencing over time. In 2016, after serving approximately 18 years in prison, Patricia Reggiani was released. Her release marked the formal end of her incarceration, but it did not erase the historical weight of the case in which she had been involved. The name Gucci, already globally recognized, remained permanently associated with one of Italy's most high-profile murder investigations. Her return to public life did not alter the established legal conclusions of the trial, but it did revive media interest in the case and its broader implications. From the perspective of investigators, the case had already reached its conclusion years earlier. Their findings had established a clear framework of events based on the evidence presented in court. A murder-for-hire arrangement involving multiple intermediaries, a gunman who carried out the shooting on Via Palestro, and a structured chain of communication that linked the participants. The investigation had ultimately concluded that the motive behind the murder was not connected to control of the Gucci company itself, since Maurizio Gucci had already sold his ownership shares in 1993. Instead, the court accepted that the driving factors were rooted in personal circumstances that had developed over years of separation and emotional breakdown. These factors included resentment following the dissolution of the marriage, jealousy over Maurizio Gucci's relationship with Paola Franchi, concerns about changes in social status, and anxieties related to financial arrangements after the divorce. Taken together, these elements formed the basis of the prosecution's theory, which the court ultimately accepted in its ruling. Importantly, the case demonstrated how personal relationships, even after legal separation, can continue to carry emotional and psychological consequences that extend far beyond formal agreements or financial settlements. The broader impact of the case extended well beyond the individuals directly involved. In Italy and internationally, the murder of Maurizio Gucci became one of the most discussed examples of how wealth and status do not necessarily shield individuals from deeply personal conflicts. The Gucci name, long associated with luxury fashion and global prestige, became permanently linked in public memory with the events of March 27, 1995. The contrast between the brand's glamorous public image and the private tragedy of family members' violent death contributed to the enduring fascination with the case. Over time, the story also entered popular culture. In 2021, the events surrounding Maurizio Gucci's life and death were adapted into the film House of Gucci. The film brought renewed international attention to the case, introducing it to audiences who may not have been familiar with the details of the investigation or trial. In the film, Lady Gaga portrayed Patricia Reggiani, while Adam Driver portrayed Maurizio Gucci. While the movie dramatized certain aspects of the story for cinematic purposes, it was based on the real events that had been documented through years of investigation and legal proceedings. The film's release demonstrated how the case had evolved from a criminal investigation into a cultural narrative that continued to attract interest decades after the original events. Yet beyond its adaptation into entertainment and its presence in media coverage, the case continues to carry a more sobering significance. At its core, the murder of Maurizio Gucci remains a story about the consequences of unresolved conflict and the ways in which personal relationships can deteriorate over time. It is a reminder that behind public images of wealth, success, and glamour, there can exist private histories marked by emotional strain, separation, and resentment. The legal process ultimately determined responsibility for the crime, but it could not erase the human loss at the center of the case. Maurizio Gucci's death on a Milan street in 1995 marked the abrupt end of a life shaped by one of Italy's most famous family legacies. He had been a businessman, a former head of a global fashion house, a husband, and a father. In the final years of his life, he had moved beyond his role within the Gucci company and was building a new personal chapter. That trajectory was cut short in a matter of seconds, leaving behind questions that investigators would spend years answering. The resolution of the case, through trial and conviction, provided legal closure, but it also highlighted the complexity of human motivations and the difficulty of fully understanding how private grievances can escalate into public violence. The investigation revealed a structured conspiracy involving multiple individuals, each playing a role in a chain of events that ultimately led to murder. At the same time, it underscored how indirect communication, emotional distance, and intermediary relationships can obscure responsibility until carefully reconstructed through investigative work. Even after decades, the case remains one of the most recognizable criminal investigations in modern Italian history. It continues to be referenced not only for its connection to a globally famous fashion name, but also for the way it illustrates the intersection of personal relationships and criminal planning. The story of Maurizio Gucci is ultimately not only about how he died, but about the complex web of decisions, emotions, and actions that made that moment possible. In reflecting on the case, what remains most striking is not only the sophistication of the investigation or the notoriety of those involved, but the contrast between the public image of success associated with the Gucci name and the private reality that unfolded behind it. The final image left by the case is not one of luxury or fame, but of a quiet Milan morning interrupted by violence, a moment that ended a life and reshaped the legacy of an entire family name in the eyes of the world. Although the legal proceedings surrounding the murder of Maurizio Gucci formally concluded with a trial and sentencing, the case itself continued to evolve in a different form, no longer as an active investigation or courtroom battle, but as a lasting cultural and psychological reference point that extended far beyond the boundaries of Italian criminal justice. In the years following the conviction of all parties involved, the case gradually transitioned from a legal matter into a public narrative that was repeatedly revisited, reinterpreted, and re-examined through media coverage, documentaries, and eventually cinematic adaptation. What remained particularly striking was not only the brutality of the crime itself, but the contrast between the public image of the Gucci family name and the deeply private and emotionally charged circumstances that had led to the events of March 27, 1995. Over time, the murder became less about a single moment of violence and more about what that moment represented. The collision between wealth, personal identity, fractured relationships, and long-term emotional resentment that had been building for years beneath the surface of an outwardly glamorous life. Even after the courts had established legal responsibility and assigned sentences to each participant in the alleged conspiracy, public interest did not fade. Instead, the case took on a symbolic dimension. often discussed in terms of how personal grievances can escalate into irreversible consequences when combined with influence, access, and the ability to outsource violence through intermediaries. The structure of the murder-for-hire arrangement itself became a key element of its lasting notoriety, demonstrating how distance between the planner and the act can obscure accountability until painstakingly reconstructed by investigators. At the same time, the case continued to serve as a reference point in discussions about the limitations of wealth in preventing personal conflict. Since Maurizio Gucci's financial position and family legacy did not shield him from the consequences of a deteriorated marriage and unresolved emotional tensions. In broader cultural memory, the Gucci name remained associated not only with luxury fashion, but also with one of Italy's most widely publicized criminal cases. A dual identity that merged commercial prestige with personal tragedy in a way few other family names have experienced. The later adaptation of the story into film further cemented its place in global popular culture. But even without dramatization, the core narrative retained its impact. A carefully planned assassination carried out in seconds, preceded by years of personal breakdown and followed by decades of reflection on how such a sequence of events could have unfolded within one of the world's most famous families. Ultimately, the enduring shadow of the case lies not in unanswered legal questions, which were resolved through the courts, but in the broader human implications it continues to evoke: questions about trust, betrayal, emotional rupture, and the fragile boundary between private conflict and public consequence, all anchored forever to a quiet morning in Milan when a routine walk into an office ended in irreversible violence. Even after the verdict had been delivered, the sentences pronounced, and the prison doors closed behind the defendants, the murder of Maurizio Gucci continued to resist the idea of a final ending. In legal terms, the case had reached its conclusion years earlier, but in cultural, psychological, and historical terms, it remained open, continuously reinterpreted through new generations of media, public discussion, and retrospective analysis. What makes this case persist is not a mystery left unsolved, but rather a structure of events that, once fully revealed, raises deeper questions than the investigation itself could comfortably contain. The crime was solved in the sense that responsibility was assigned and confirmed by the courts. Yet the human logic behind it, how a marriage collapsed into an alleged murder-for-hire conspiracy involving intermediaries, money, emotional resentment, and distance between intent and action, continues to invite examination. At the center of this enduring attention is a paradox. The murder was operationally simple in execution, but psychologically and socially complex in origin. And it is this contrast that keeps the case alive long after its legal resolution. To understand why, it is necessary to revisit not the events of a single morning in Milan, but the layered architecture of circumstances that made that morning possible, and how each layer continues to resonate beyond the courtroom narrative. One of the most persistent aspects of the case is the structure of delegation that defined the alleged conspiracy. The investigation and trial described a chain in which no single individual connected all points of action. Instead, responsibility was distributed across multiple participants: an alleged organizer, intermediaries, a recruiter, a driver, and a gunman. This fragmentation is not unusual in contract killings, but in this case, it gained particular notoriety because of the social status of the individuals involved and the public identity of the victim. The idea that a member of one of Italy's most famous families could be killed through such a mediated structure challenged common assumptions about proximity to violence. It demonstrated how emotional or financial motives, when filtered through layers of separation, can produce outcomes that appear almost detached from their origin. The further removed the planner is from the act itself, the easier it becomes to abstract the consequences. And this distance is one of the most unsettling psychological dimensions of the case. It forces a recognition that violence does not always emerge from direct confrontation. It can be assembled gradually through indirect relationships and delegated decisions that accumulate toward a single irreversible moment. Another dimension that continues to draw analysis is the role of identity and status in shaping the emotional landscape of the individuals involved. Maurizio Gucci was not only a private individual, but also a symbolic figure connected to global luxury branding. Even after he had sold his ownership stake in the company, his surname carried weight independent of financial control, and that symbolic value extended into his personal relationships. Patrizia Reggiani, likewise, existed within a social framework that had been defined for years by association with the Gucci name. When the marriage ended, the separation was not only emotional and legal, but also symbolic, altering the identity structures that had defined both individuals for decades. The prosecution's case emphasized factors such as jealousy, resentment, fear of diminished status, and concern over financial security. But beneath these legally articulated motives lies a more complex reality: the dissolution of a shared identity that had once been reinforced by public visibility and private dependency. The case, therefore, continues to be studied not only as a criminal conspiracy, but also as an example of how identity fragmentation within high-status relationships can produce long-term psychological instability when the shared framework collapses. Equally significant is the temporal dimension of the case, particularly the gap between the crime in 1995 and the breakthrough in 1997 that shifted the entire investigation. During those 2 years, the case remained effectively frozen, defined by a lack of forensic evidence and the absence of direct identification of perpetrators. This period of investigative stagnation is often overlooked in popular retellings. Yet it is central to understanding why the eventual resolution was so dependent on indirect evidence, such as communications, testimonies, and reconstructed financial relationships. The absence of physical proof meant that the case had to be solved through narrative reconstruction, rather than purely forensic certainty. This introduces an important limitation that continues to be discussed in legal and investigative contexts: how complex conspiracies can be proven when direct evidence is minimal and the structure of the crime itself is designed to avoid traceability. The reliance on intermediary testimony and surveillance data illustrates both the strength and vulnerability of modern investigative methods in cases where intent is dispersed across multiple actors. The role of intermediaries in the case also remains a key subject of analysis. Figures positioned between the alleged planner and the executioners functioned as both connectors and buffers, enabling communication while maintaining separation. This structure is significant because it reflects a broader pattern observed in organized criminal arrangements, where distance is used as a form of insulation. However, what distinguishes this case is not the existence of intermediaries itself, but the social context in which they operated. These were not anonymous actors within a distant criminal network, but individuals embedded within overlapping personal and social relationships. This proximity adds a layer of psychological complexity, as it blurs the boundary between personal loyalty, financial incentive, and criminal responsibility. It also demonstrates how informal networks, rather than strictly hierarchical organizations, can sometimes facilitate serious crimes when trust and access intersect with opportunity. Another reason the case continues to attract attention is its relationship to public perception and media representation. From a moment of the murder, the involvement of the Gucci name ensured global visibility. But over time, the narrative expanded beyond journalism into cultural storytelling. The adaptation of the case into film further transformed it into a mediated narrative shaped by interpretation, characterization, and dramatization. While the legal facts of the case remain fixed in court records, public understanding of those facts is often filtered through cultural representations that emphasize emotion and conflict. This divergence between legal reality and cultural narrative contributes to the case's longevity, as each retelling recontextualizes the same events through different emotional frameworks. The result is a case that exists simultaneously as documented legal history and as evolving cultural mythology, where emphasis shifts depending on the medium through which it is presented. At its core, however, the enduring relevance of the case lies in its fundamental human structure. It is not the presence of wealth alone that defines the story, nor is it solely the notoriety of the family name. Rather, it is the intersection of personal breakdown and procedural execution. A marriage that once represented unity gradually transformed into separation, legal dissolution, and ultimately alleged hostility severe enough to be examined as motive for murder. The transformation from relationship to rupture, and from rupture to alleged orchestration of violence, remains the most psychologically difficult aspect to fully comprehend. It challenges assumptions about how emotional experiences translate into actions and how long-term. Resentment can evolve into decisions with irreversible consequences. Even decades later, the murder of Maurizio Gucci continues to be revisited not because it lacks resolution, but because it offers a complete narrative that still feels difficult to fully contain within a single explanation. The legal system provided its answer through conviction and sentencing, establishing accountability within the framework of law. Yet the broader questions about how individuals interpret loss, how identity shifts under pressure, and how distance between intent and action can enable extreme outcomes remain open to interpretation. In this sense, the case does not end with a verdict. It ends instead with a lasting awareness of how fragile the boundaries are between private emotional history and public irreversible consequence. Anchored forever to a single morning in Milan, where routine gave way to tragedy in less than a minute, but whose implications continue to extend far beyond that moment in time.